This is Jerry Coleman, play-by-play voice of the Dothan High Wolves on 96.9 The Legend, and you're tuned into the Phillip Jordan Podcast.
What's up, everybody, and welcome in to this week's edition of the Phillip Jordan Podcast. I am your host, Phillip Jordan, in studio host and producer of Dothan Football on 96.9 The Legend, and Auburn writer for Last Word on college football. The show is brought to you by Wiregrass Daily News and Digio Strategies, and we have a fun one for you today. We have two great guests lined up on the show. Bill Bender from the Sporting News will be on. Did the College Football Playoff Committee get the rankings right? We'll spend about 10, 15 minutes with Bill Bender, and then we'll talk Tennessee Volunteers. They are playing at Columbus, Ohio against the Buckeyes, Ohio State, in the first round. We will talk them with Sylvia from Vol Report over at Rivals.com. So plenty of college football discussion here on this edition of the show. Remember, you can follow me on social media at PJordanSEC. You can find a podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. If you're on Apple Podcasts, please follow, rate, and review. Leave a review, and I will read it on a future edition of the show. And if you leave just 4 stars, you're just a straight-up hater. Also, check out the show over at Wiregrass Daily News, and also over on YouTube at the Phillip Jordan Sports YouTube channel. And if you want to email me, hit me up over at sportstalkphillipjordan@gmail.com. Now, let's listen to the guest. First up, Bill Bender from the Sporting News. Everybody join me on the phone right now with Sporting News senior writer Bill Bender. We're going to get into the college football playoff, the bracket, how the rankings shaped out, all that good stuff. But Bill, as always, I appreciate you coming on the show, talk college football.
Hey, Phillip. Thanks for having me on, man. How are you?
Doing good. A little chilly down here in Southeast Alabama. We're not used to that down here, so it's really as a culture shock for us when the cold first starts hit. But it's pretty good down here. I hope everything's good your way.
Yeah, it's winter. It's cold. A little bit of that. That'll be the great test when we get to the playoff. Is there's a little bit of snow on the ground here in Central Ohio, and I know the Tennessee Volunteers are coming up here in about a week, so we will see how that, which was the narrative we've talked about for years, plays out in the college football playoff.
Yeah, it is interesting because obviously, during all the bowls, when the Big Ten and SEC would play, it was always in Florida. So you always kind of wondered if, they had those matchups. So that's obviously one of the more intriguing ones there with Tennessee going at their Ohio State. Just overall, how the bracket turned out. And I guess, I'm here in Alabama, so I guess I'll just lead with the question. In your opinion, was that the right decision to put SMU in over the Crimson Tide?
Yeah, I think it sets a good precedent that if this is the format we're going to use, we are going to honor the regular season. Now, you can get in a debate about the strength of schedule between Alabama, between the leagues, however you want to slice it, but the games still have to matter. I think Alabama would beat SMU head-to-head, but that's not what we're doing. Alabama lost 3 regular season games in their conference, 3 road games. SMU showed enough in that ACC championship game, especially with the second half comeback. I mean, it is what it is. Alabama would have been 11 or 12 anyway. So to give I know SMU is going to be under a lot of scrutiny in the college football playoff, but all considered, Phillip, I think they deserve that berth.
Yeah, I did too as well. And it's just, like you said, the losses. I mean, look, the Tennessee loss, that's fine. But you lose to 2 6-6 teams. Look, if you want to look at it in a weird way, they're bowl eligible because they beat Alabama. And, before we kind of get into the way the bracket did come out and turn out and look, just Alabama season, year 1 under Kalen DeBoer. What did you like from him, what you've seen, and what are kind of some things you think they need to work on?
Well, the Georgia game was obviously the hype. What a game that was. September 28th. You saw it that night. And then when LSU, there were glimpses of a truly dynamic team around Jalen Milroe. And then there was inconsistency on the road. The Georgia game was followed up by the Vanderbilt loss. Then turnovers do them in against Tennessee, and they just have Oklahoma. And I think that more than anything probably kept them out. 10-2 Alabama is in over SMU. People might not have liked it, but they would have been. 9-3 with that Oklahoma loss and how poor they played that evening was probably the impetus to keep them out of the playoff more than anything, in my opinion.
Yeah, and, just looking at, the overall bracket seating, which everybody talked about, which I think we talked about this last time, just kind of like how the rankings are versus how the seedings turn out and all that stuff. What was kind of like some of your big takeaways from the bracket that we got for the first 12-team playoff?
Yeah, I think it was good. It was there are things, they still need to seed it correctly for the format that we have. I thought the first round games are going to be fun. We'll see if they're competitive. That'll be the key. It's one thing to have a fun bracket. It's another to have a competitive one. All 4 games have a spread of 7 points or more. That's probably a little bit of a concern for me. All 4 games, they might be competitive. They might not. I think Tennessee and Ohio State will be. I think Indiana and Notre Dame should be. But the other 2, I would anticipate that SMU and Texas win. And if they play well, they'll win handily. So I think that part of it. But if you seeded this according to the rankings instead of, just giving Arizona State and Boise State a first-round bye, I think that's something those 2 teams will also have a lot of pressure on them to play well in their games because it's going to have the person handed something.
Yeah, just overall looking at the bracket, and I agree with you on the Ohio State Tennessee game. I'm very looking forward to that one. I know a lot of people's making a deal about SEC team going to play up in the cold, but it's not like it's hot in Tennessee right now. It's cold there too, so they're used to cold weather.
Yeah,
but
yeah, and that's going to be the test. I mean, the test goes both ways. Yes, Tennessee's going to have to contend in that environment, and with Ohio State, 100,000 seat stadium, and they play in those environments in the SEC. I get that, but and for Ohio State, the big test will be which team comes out. They are a ultimate boom or bust team, in my opinion, in this format. If they come out and play well, they could win the whole thing. If they come out and it's an extension of the hangover from the Michigan game, they could easily get beaten round 1. So it's going to be interesting to see which Ohio State team shows up for the playoff.
Yeah, it feels like with that matchup, it kind of almost comes down to, and I know most games do, but the quarterback play, Nico and Will Howard, because Tennessee's a good defensive team as well. They want to run the ball with Dylan Sampson. Ohio State's a really good defensive team as well. Just kind of seems like the quarterback play there is really going to be heightened for this game with the environment and to just how those 2 teams operate defensively.
I mean, Nico obviously is having a good year. But Tennessee trusts him. Ohio State, do they trust Will Howard? Does Chip Kelly trust him? And I think that quarterback play, a couple turnovers will make a difference in that game. Tennessee does some things well that Michigan does well, and that's going to be a test for Ohio State. They have a very good front 7, very active around James Pierce. They have a dominant running game around Dylan Sampson, who's one of the best running backs in the country. So, and they're good on Ohio State defense that gave up the fewest points in college football this season. So, and those things, and it adds up to the last time they played in a bowl game. You got to go back to Eddie George and Peyton Manning on the field, and it was a 20-14 game. I could similar kind of gut it out win either side in this one.
Yeah, I knew it. They had played in a bowl game way back when, and I'm glad you brought that up because and I remember that it was a Peyton Manning, Eddie George matchup in that one. And again with the bracket, you kind of you always look at matchups. Who's got the favorable matchup, who's got the best path. A lot of people look at Penn State's got a really potentially they play SMU, which I think a lot of people are looking past that. They probably shouldn't. SMU's a good team. And then they would play Boise State. Then, okay, they could get into the Final Four. Do you kind of see it that way, or do you kind of see something within the bracket where a team's kind of got an interesting or not necessarily easy, but just a more favorable path to get to the Final Four?
You said it. Penn State has that path. They got to take advantage of that. You play SMU and you're an 8.5-point favorite if they take care of business at home there. And they don't lose against underdogs as an underdog or as a favorite much. They've only lost, I believe, 1 game as a favorite in the last 3 seasons. So, and that was to Ole Miss in the Peach Bowl. So Their opportunity is there. And then if they play Boise State, I would assume they would probably be about a 7-point favorite in that game as well, depending on, what happens in the first game. But the opportunity is there. And this is the problem with the rankings versus the seeding, is that Oregon, who went 13-0 and won the Big Ten championship and has been generally dominant all season, will have to play the winner of Tennessee and Ohio State, which is a more difficult match than Penn State as a 6th seed would face against Boise State. And I just don't know why we're doing it that way.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I'm kind of thinking like I'm all for the 5 highest ranked conference champions automatically getting in, but then we just see this thing 1 through 12 because it is like, okay, you're the number 1 seed and Oregon is almost being punished for it. I know it's like almost like they've been better off had they lost in the Big Ten championship game versus actually winning it.
Right. And, Oregon's done everything they can do during the regular season. They won all 13 games. They look good. They won at Wisconsin. They won at Michigan. They did all the 2 time zone trips and stayed unbeaten. Dylan Gabriel played at a Heisman Trophy level. I'm not sure if he'll win it, but he played at a level that he got to New York, and that's what they needed. So, Dan Lanning, the opportunity is there to be the first 16-0 team in college football history. Would be a heck of a standard to set in the first year of this thing.
And my final question before I let you go, of course, Georgia playing in the second round in the quarterfinals, but obviously the Carson Beck stuff, seeing reports early in the week where probably wouldn't be able to play in the quarterfinal matchup. How much does that change things? Because I don't know, in my opinion, I think they could beat Indiana or Notre Dame without Carson Beck if the defense plays how they played against Texas. But obviously in the semifinals, Carson Beck's going to be needed.
Yeah, I mean, the Notre Dame game will be really telling. If Notre Dame beats or Indiana, I'm picking Notre Dame to win that game. So I think with Notre Dame, whoever that quarterback is, which Georgia team shows up, is it second half Georgia against Alabama and Georgia Tech and Texas, where the defense is flying around, not giving up plays, and they're running the ball with Trevor Etienne? Yeah, they'll be fine. If it's the inconsistent defense that we at times this season, and they can't complete a forward pass and the receivers don't play well, they will lose to Notre Dame if all of those things happen. So that's one of those games that I think will make or break the bracket. If Notre Dame beats Indiana, Georgia, Notre Dame is the one I would circle in the second round as the one that will determine what happens everywhere else.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. This is going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait till next Friday when we kick this thing off, and then of course the Saturday after with the triple header. But Bill, it's been a lot of fun having you on talking the college football playoff. I hope we can do this again before the whole season is over with. But if people wanted to follow you online, where can they find you?
Yeah, I'm at Bill Bender 92 at sportingnews.com. It's always a pleasure to catch up with you. I know we'll have a lot to talk about over. Maybe we can do this again before the second round games, whenever you want to go. But busy news, we have a lot of content up, and it's been a lot of fun covering it. Can't wait to see how this thing goes.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun these next these 4 rounds of playoffs. And Bill, once again, appreciate the time, and I look forward when we get to chat again.
Hey, no problem. Thank you.
Everybody joining me next, my second guest on the show this week is Ryan Sylvia. You can check him out over at the Vol Report. Rivals.com covers all things Tennessee Vols, basketball, men and women, of course, the football team with a big playoff game coming up next weekend. And Ryan, appreciate you coming on the show once again to talk Vols.
Yeah, I appreciate having me on. Sorry for the viewers, the literal YouTube viewers. A little funny background for me in my car right now, as you mentioned, Tennessee men's and women's basketball. They were up in New York, so I made the travel, trying to make my way back to Knoxville as we prepare for a big football weekend coming up next weekend over in Columbus.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's probably the matchup I think most people are looking forward to most to seeing in the first round, just those 2 teams. The 9-8 matchup. But I did actually want to start off with basketball with you, just talking about the number 1 ranked Tennessee Volunteers. They're 9-0 on the season, beat Miami on Tuesday night up there in the New York area where you're coming to us from. But anyways, 75-62, just what's really stood out this early season with the 9-0 Tennessee Volunteers for you?
Because it's not even that they're just 9-0. It's the really impressive thing is I don't think they've played a game that's finished within single digits. And of course, they've played their fair share of the cupcake type of teams that everyone plays early in the season where you expect to beat up on them. But they went on the road and played at Louisville, who's a much improved team compared to last year. They went and they just played that Miami team. They went over to Baja Mar, and they played Virginia, and then they played a ranked Baylor team. They've beaten Syracuse at home. So they've played, I mean, they're 4-0 in ACC play at this point. So they've been tested, and no one's been able to really come close to them or give them any real run for their money. And that's not necessarily exactly what a lot of people thought this season would be. I think people thought Tennessee would be a really good basketball team, but not necessarily a great team, like a #1 team in the country on track to be a 1 seed and maybe win back-to-back SEC regular season championships like they are. But a lot of that goes to Chaz Lanier and what he's been able to do. I don't think anyone expected someone to just come in and replace Dalton Connect and do it in 1 season and just have an offensive season like Dalton did last year. And that's not exactly what Chaz is. Like, it's unfair to say, like, hey, you're the Dalton Connect replacement. Like, that's an impossible standard to live to. But he's come in, he's been phenomenal for Tennessee as they kind of continue to play that elite defense that Rick Barnes likes, while they're turning into a more modern offense with guys like Dalton Connect, with guys like Chaz Lanier, and with Zakai Ziegler, a healthy senior, kind of contributing on both ends, distributing the ball. They're a tough team to beat. Who knows when that first loss is going to be? They got a couple more tests coming up. They're going to be on the road at Illinois this weekend, and then they're going to try to coast into SEC play, which is the best conference in college basketball right now, along with football and women's basketball and baseball and softball and pretty much everything. So it's going to be a tough schedule, but they're as good as anyone right now.
Yeah, I had my notes down with Chaz Lanier, and I know going into the year, I was looking at the Tennessee team. You know, going into it, I mean, they're going to be good defensively, but the Dalton Connect part of it, how do you replace that guy? And of course, you know, as you mentioned, 2 different players, but still that scoring. And obviously, we've seen what Dalton Connect's doing in the NBA, so an extremely talented player. So yeah, that's been a really interesting thing. I mean, he's scoring 22 points again. 20 points a game, 19.1 points. We had 22 on Tuesday night, but rebounding the ball from the guard position, getting 3 rebounds a game from a guard is always good. The assist, and really good from 3. That was another thing. Like last year with Tennessee with Dalton Connect, yeah, he was putting up points, but just what he was doing from the 3-point line, how that opens up things for everybody else. And, you know, it looks like Chaz is kind of continuing at least that trend that Dalton had as the really good 3-point shooter. And, of course, like I said, opens up things for everybody else.
And he's really efficient too. So it's not like he's just sitting back and hurling a bunch of threes and hoping to go. I mean, he's shooting the ball like 50% from 3 in the last handful of games, and with a good load of shots that he's taking too. He led the country in efficiency last year at North Florida, and that's what got him a little bit of NBA attention, attention from pretty much anywhere you wanted in the country. It's kind of his pick of where he wanted to go, and ultimately lands at Tennessee. I think Tennessee fans are definitely really happy he did, because he's been a really big push for the Vols as they have had games where, you know, you look at the game in Madison Square Garden the other night, all of a sudden you blink and Miami's pulling within 6 points. And what did they do? They turned back to Chaz Lanier, and he was able to get the offense back on track and able to create that separation down the stretch that Tennessee ultimately used to win. So he's been a nice card for Tennessee to have to play, where, hey, you need some points. You know, the defense is playing well, but you need some points. Let's get the ball to Chaz and see what happens.
Absolutely. Like I said, they play the matchup with Illinois this Saturday, then Western Carolina, Middle Tennessee State, and then Norfolk State. So get past Illinois, you should be 13-0 going into conference play, which will be a big deal doing that. Now, was over in the football side of things. Tennessee will be playing Ohio State, the 8-9 matchup. Just, you know, first off, Tennessee coming in as the 9 seed in the bracket. It just gets kind of confusing when you talk about what's the rankings versus the seeds. They really got to fix some of these things with the playoff. But hey, first year, we'll give them a little grace, I guess, first year. But just where Tennessee landed, were you good with that? I think that was a good spot for Tennessee. Maybe they should have been higher. What were your thoughts?
I think if you look at the literal path to the championship, Tennessee might have the worst one in the entire field. I mean, you have to go on the road in game 1 and play at Ohio State. And Ohio State's a beatable team, and we've seen that throughout the year with their 2 losses, which I think you kind of excuse that Oregon one. I mean, on the road against the #1 team in the country. But the Michigan loss is pretty inexcusable. So it showed you that they're beatable, but that's still not a game that you would sign up for necessarily if you're trying to find an easy path to the title game. And then the winner of that, well, now you have to go across the country to the Rose Bowl and play the number one team, Oregon, who's yet to lose a game. After that, you probably get Texas. From there, I mean, you're going to have to play a good team in the semifinals. So I don't think you can really complain about a matchup that far. But those first two games, it's kind of as tough as you're going to get in the field. There's teams that are seeded worse than Tennessee that probably have an easier path, just given not only who they play in the first round, which even maybe it's a tougher team than Ohio State in that first round, but then you look at who they play in the second round. With the automatic conference bids in those 1 through 4 spots, now you have an Arizona State team that I think a lot of people are okay to play and would feel pretty decent about playing. You have the Boise State team that I think a lot of people would be okay about playing. Not that those are bad teams, but when you compare them to the rest of the teams in the 12-team playoff, those are the sore thumbs in it. Them and Clemson, the three auto conference bids that maybe wouldn't have been in the picture if you just took the straight up best 12 team. So in terms of like the literal path for Tennessee, I think you probably couldn't have got a worse one. However, is that where they deserve to be? Probably about that 8 or 9 seed, your 2-loss SEC team. You lose on the road to Georgia, whatever, it happens. I don't think you can fault them too much for that. Arkansas lost on the road. There's worse losses out there, but it's not a great one. So you go 10-2 like that, you're probably going to be sitting around that 7, 8, 9 seed mark, and ultimately with the way things shook out, they were that 9 seed. So you're just going to have to take it. Josh Heupel's not shying away from it. Keep saying, put the ball down, we'll play whoever, wherever, and that's the mentality you have to have.
Yeah, on the flip side, we look at Oregon's the number 1 seed, and the bracket did them no favors because they may have been better off losing against Penn State in a Big Ten title game. Like you said, it's like the top part of the bracket because the other side, on that side on the first round, you'll have Texas and Clemson, and you got the Oregon side, of course, Arizona State there. But yeah, that's kind of like that's the when we look at NCAA tournament, we always look what's the hard part of the bracket, and that seems like here with football, that's where it's at. And then this matchup with Ohio State too as well. I know a lot of people, I think maybe outside of the SEC and maybe up north, I don't know, they're probably looking, oh wow, an SEC team gets to go play in the cold. I'm like, do y'all realize it's not necessarily hot in Tennessee right now? So I mean, it's not like today. I mean, okay, if this was a Florida team going up there, okay, that's one thing. But this is Tennessee. It's pretty cold already in Knoxville. So I don't think the weather part of it is really going to be as much of a factor. I think that some people are probably hoping or thinking it could be.
I don't think it'll play really any factor. I mean, both teams are going to, if it's cold enough that it's making an impact on the game, I think both teams are probably cold in the first place, especially with, sure, Ohio State gets talent from the north, but it's not like they don't have kids from Florida and kids from Texas on their roster too that aren't necessarily used to the cold either. But yeah, I mean, Josh Heupel made a good point too. They practice in the morning. Like the sun's barely risen. It's cold in the morning sometimes in Knoxville, and they're not afraid to go outside, especially when they know they have a game that's going to be potentially with some elements like that. And so they're going to be practicing in conditions that are probably going to be pretty similar to what game day is going to be like in Columbus. Today in Knoxville, as you can tell, I'm not in Knoxville right now. It's still a little bit ways away, but obviously know people in Knoxville, and they're taking pictures of the snow and stuff that's on the ground and how cold it is there. I don't think it'll be like that in Columbus in a week if you look at some of the early forecasts. So I don't think it'll play much of a factor. If Tennessee loses on Saturday, I can't imagine that the big takeaway is going to be, well, it's because it was 30 degrees. I think it'll be because, actual on the field play happened.
Yeah, and too, with this matchup too going into, a lot of times we see this in the NFL playoffs. It's about defense and running the ball because it is colder in most places you're going to play. I feel like for college, you can kind of put a lot of those, thoughts and concepts there too as well. With Tennessee, they're a really good defense team. We know what they're available, especially on the defensive line. And of course, you have this guy named Dylan Sampson, a really good running back, one of the best in the country, which you can control a game that way. So that part of it, I feel like Tennessee's got a big advantage because honestly, I watched Ohio State play this year. They seem like they struggle on the offensive line at times. They struggle with the run game. So then you would think, okay, it's going to come down to the quarterbacks. And I don't know if I'm a Ohio State fan, I'm trusting Will Howard. What's your kind of like thoughts on just all that kind of how the matchups line up for Tennessee, particularly, with those kind of like areas I just mentioned?
There are some, not necessarily strength on strength. It's just two really good defenses that are going up against each other, and they're good in different ways. Tennessee's a lot deeper too, which I think could be a factor this late in the season. But the Dylan Sampson factor, I do think, could be a big deal in terms of I'm not sure if anyone would be too surprised if this game finished like 17-10. And the way you get to 17 isn't necessarily Nico throwing the ball all over the field. It could be, all right, well, Dylan Sampson's getting rolling, and all of a sudden he has 5 carries this drive, and he's already picked up 50 yards, and now you're deep into Ohio State territory. So it's going to be a defensive game, I think, first. You're going to have to limit that trio of receivers Ohio State has. You're going to have to limit that duo of running backs they have and make things difficult for Will Howard. But if you can get even just a couple good drives out of Dylan Sampson and get him over that 100-yard mark like he's been on 20-plus carries, and if you can have Nico take care of the football, and Dylan Sampson take care of the football too, because he's kind of had some fumble issues recently as well, but just don't turn the ball over, don't spot him that field, take care of the ball, make the plays there in front of you, and rely on that defense. I don't think you hate Tennessee's chances. It's going to be a tough game. It's not going to be one that Tennessee's obviously favored in, and it's not going to be one that I think a lot of people necessarily take them in. But if you just kind of take care of your own business, it might be one of those games where kind of who shoots themselves in the foot less. It might be the team that wins it.
Yeah, and just, from what I've seen Ohio State, and I'm sure you've seen it too, it seems like there's a lot of anxiety in Columbus right now with Ryan Day. I think if Tennessee comes out and has a really fast start, it could snowball, no pun intended, with potential weather on Ohio State, just because that pressure and on Ryan Day, and who knows what happens to him if Tennessee does upset him in this game. So Tennessee has an opportunity there. If you can silence that Ohio State crowd very early, this is supposed to be a night game. It's going to be I think very interesting how on the Ohio State things, how they respond just with that, as I said, anxiety that seems like it's around their program right now.
I think that's a great point. Just looking at, you kind of see people on social media, and obviously that doesn't paint the fullest picture of what the actual game day and the ticket sales are going to look like. But you see a portion of Ohio State fans that are like, yeah, I mean, I've had season tickets, and I'm not, like, I'm done. I'm not, which I think is a little insane. I mean, you are 10-2 and in the playoffs, and I know it's frustrating to lose to Michigan that often, but like, come on. I mean, it's not that bad. But the expectation is higher there. You should be winning championships with the rosters you have, and you absolutely shouldn't be losing to bad Michigan teams. But and I mean, maybe too. Are Ohio State fans going to be used to staying up that late? They're used to their big noon kickoff. So all of a sudden you get them under the lights. It might be nap time for them by halftime going to bed. But yeah, it is frustration growing up there. And it hasn't been hard to tell that people are getting displeased with Ryan Day. So you think about that LSU game in 2022 that Tennessee won. You have a good return, you score quickly, and all of a sudden you look up and you're halfway through the first quarter and it's like a 2 or 3 possession lead, and the fans at LSU just started filling out of that stadium. And I'm not sure if we'll see something to that extent in the playoff game, but if you can score early and maybe get a 3 and out or 2 on the defensive end, there might be some real frustration, not only in the stands, but also on that sideline as well, with just the way that Michigan game was so recent. Like, it's one thing if you're like Tennessee and you've been able to rebound from a frustrating loss at Georgia that maybe you felt like you should have won. You've had the chance to kind of get some wins under your belt. That's still the last thing Ohio State guys have faced is that loss to Michigan. It could be kind of still something they have to deal with if things start going Tennessee's way.
Yeah, and I kind of wanted to, kind of continue on with the quarterback matchup, Will Howard and then Nico. And then I feel like of the two teams, Tennessee trusts their quarterback more. I have to think, just because Will Howard has thrown some pick sixes. He's made mistakes. I mean, he made some bad ones against Michigan. I mean, and I feel like Nico actually probably had his best game of the year against Vanderbilt. 18 of 26, 257, 4 touchdowns. I mean, I know it's been kind of up and down with hitting the deep shots, but he really played well in his last game. How have you seen Nico's kind of like development as the season has gone on?
He's absolutely trended in the right direction. There was some freshman errors, I guess, early in the season where it was like, you can't make that throw. Like, you can't turn the ball over there. It's a bad decision. It's really since the second half of Alabama, he turned it on. He led Tennessee to that comeback win, had a really nice sort of Chris Brazzell to seal that game. And after that, it was like, okay, that was probably Nico's best performance in that second half. Well, then the next week, against Kentucky, it was like, okay, well, he took the next step. And then he had a pretty good first half against Mississippi State and got injured. And so you kind of put that one to the side. And then it was time for Georgia. And I thought he played a pretty good game against Georgia. And then It was a slow start against UTEP the next week, but ultimately a nice game there. And then he had a really nice game against Vanderbilt. So every game he's kind of, all right, that was his best game, and then he's topping it. And that was his best game, and then he's topping it. And that's exactly what you want to see from a guy that's starting his, 14th game when he goes to Ohio State and is still trying to kind of get used to things at the college level. Like it's still not a lot of experience. It's a lot more than when he started the year, though. And the good thing is you can see the progression. You can see how much different of a player he is. So if he can kind of keep building in that right direction and keep gaining the trust of the coaches and keep maybe opening up that playbook more and more and more in throws that they feel confident with him making and things like that, then yeah, I mean, there's a chance that they do move the ball really well against Ohio State, and that could be a big difference. And as you mentioned, on the opposite side, maybe it's the complete other way around, where there's maybe a lot of faith early in the year in what Ohio State was doing on offense, and it's slowly starting to kind of dissipate in that regard. So it is two programs. I don't want to say programs, but two teams this year down the stretch that are maybe kind of trending in different directions, which is kind of the feeling about where things are going.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, you lose 4 straight to Michigan, Oklahoma again, Ohio State. I mean, they want you. You could go 11-1, but you lose to Michigan. As we have stated here, you were 10-2. You're in the playoff. You're at home. All that stuff. But there's obviously anxiety there. Last question. So obviously, we're looking forward. I've mentioned this is the game I'm most looking forward to. And then you, of course, covering the game. But the other 3 playoff matchups in the first round, is there one of those other matchups that's got you really intrigued going into this?
I think Texas and Clemson could be a fun one. That's just like a fun one to look at on the bracket. Like when you're talking like, hey, we're gonna do a 12-team playoff now, and we're gonna have some fun matchups and some teams playing each other. And I know Clemson's not Clemson of 5-6 years ago, but like Texas Clemson's still like just a fun matchup to look at on paper, and it could be an interesting game. Texas is kind of unproven still, which is funny because they've gone through an entire SEC schedule now. So it's kind of like, what more do you want from them? But they haven't gotten the best of the best in the SEC, and they've lost both their games to Georgia. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do in this playoff format. Even if they beat Clemson, then what do they do against Arizona State? And even if they beat Arizona State, then what do you do against one of those big 3 of Oregon, Tennessee, Ohio State? So that's one that I'm kind of excited to watch. SMU Penn State, I think, could be a sneaky fun one. I think SMU might have a little juice for that one and could do something interesting up there at Penn State. The Indiana one, I think Notre Dame has that one, though. That one is out of the 4 the least interesting to me. But I do think the Tennessee Ohio State game is probably going to be the most viewed game of the day. Probably maybe the closest game of the day, and one of the kind of, when you look at, hey, why are we doing a 12-team playoff? Because that game right there, Ohio State, Tennessee, and how fun that was.
Yeah, so it's going to be interesting. It's going to be fun. And Ryan, I appreciate you coming on. It's always fun having you on, talking all things Tennessee sports and Tennessee football, basketball, wherever we jump into the conversation. If the listeners and viewers want to check out online, where can they find you?
Yeah, appreciate you having me on again. It's fun talking to you. It's a fun show to be a part of. You do great work here, so it's an honor to join you every time you ask. But we're over at volreport.com, as you said earlier, on the Rivals Network. So not only is it team coverage for football, is team coverage for men's and women's basketball, baseball. We do some softball, really anything Tennessee athletics, because they like to call themselves an everything school. So we're going to cover everything if they're good at it. But we also do recruiting stuff. So signing day obviously just happened. Tennessee with the top 10 class at the moment, getting 5-star David Sanders Jr. We have content from all of that as they turn the page to the 2026 class. Men's basketball, women's basketball recruiting, just really everything you need to know. Tennessee athletics, got you covered at volreport.com.
All right, everybody, go check Ryan out. Go check out the great work they do over at Vol Report. And Ryan, appreciate the time, and I look forward we can do this again sometime down the road.
Yeah, appreciate it, Phil. Thank you.
All right. Once again, thanks to both my guests this week, Bill Bender and Ryan Sylvia, for coming on the show. And a lot of college football playoff talk. We did something on Sunday where I live reacted to the rankings, but now we do this and talk to Bill, and we talked to Ryan talking about the Tennessee Ohio State matchup. So a lot of fun there, and we'll have more coverage getting you ready for the college football playoff next week on the show. Before we get out of here, real quickly, news that happened on Wednesday, late afternoon, right before I started recording the pod. Bill Belichick is going to be the head coach of North Carolina. Report signed a 3-year, or it will be a 3-year, $30 million contract. I'm still just wrapping my head around this. Kind of surprised that Belichick would go to college football because he's so close to being the all-time winningest coach in the NFL. And at his age, is he going to coach a few years in college and go back to NFL? I just wouldn't think so. Now, you look at some of the openings coming up in the NFL, doesn't really seem as much of a match for him there. So I was kind of thinking, okay, spend another year in the media. He's doing great. A lot of people like it. And then go back to the NFL. But he's going to college. It's going to be very interesting how this works out. Now, I think it could go really bad or really good. I don't think there's going to be much in between with Bill Belichick in college football. And with NIL and transfer portal and all the other stuff, see, the college game is a lot closer to what the NFL is now than it was about a couple years ago, even 2 years ago. So we'll see how it works with him. How will he do with coaching 18 to 22, 23-year-olds versus what he was doing in the NFL? So it's going to be interesting with Bill Belichick there in college football in the ACC. So look out. Will we see how much would it add to his legacy, though, if Belichick was able to win a national championship? Just to say if he did. I don't think he will in North Carolina, but, wow, it'd be wild and just add to that legacy. And last thing before we get out of here, the Heisman Trophy will be presented on Saturday night. Kind of weird. We have a few bowl games. We had the Army-Navy game going on Saturday. So kind of a lot different than normally is usually used to. Maybe some FCS playoff games. Then you would have the Army-Navy game, then the Heisman. But we'll have some bowl action going on as well on Saturday night as well. Stay tuned to Last Word of College Football. We will have every bowl game covered for you over there. But Heisman Trophy, the 4 candidates are Cam Ward, a Miami quarterback, running back, Ashton Jeanty. Also, you'll have quarterback Dylan Gabriel out of Oregon, and then obviously Travis Hunter there at Colorado as defensive back and wide receiver. He will be there as well. So how would I rank these players? So you look at it, I have a feeling Cam Ward's going to get the trophy, but it's kind of hard to argue also against Travis Hunter. 92 catches, over 1,000 yards, 14 touchdown receiving, 4 interceptions, just the versatile talents he has playing on both sides. Cam Ward Miami lost 2 games, didn't get the playoff, 10-2. Look, a lot of it's him. He had to bring them back so many games, pull them out of holes, really cover up the bad defense, and he did eventually catch up with Miami. I think if it was me, I would put Jeanty at 3 and then Dylan Gabriel at 4. No SEC players in the Heisman, but who really was he going to put there? I think at one point Jackson Dart may have been a candidate to put in that spot, and Jalen Milroe, but they kind of, with losses and just falling off toward the end there, we're not going to see the guys, obviously, there in New York. So it'll be interesting on Saturday who takes it home. To me, it's either going to be Cam Ward or Travis Hunter. My prediction is Cam Ward, but it's really hard not to argue for Travis Hunter as the best player in college football. And that's going to do it for this edition of the Phillip Jordan Podcast. Be back next week with some more audio content for you and some video content if you like checking out on YouTube and the videos on Facebook as well. Remember, you can follow me on social media at PJordanSEC. Podcasts available on all your favorite podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. You can also check it out over at Wiregrass Daily News. Go to the site, go to the Facebook page, keep up with all the latest news around the Wiregrass. Check the show out on YouTube, Phillip Jordan Sports. You can always email me at sports.philipjordan@gmail.com. Hope everybody has a great week. It's going to be a lesser weekend in college football. And actually, usually I would have done NFL picks on the show. I'm going to drop that this weekend as its own individual short podcast episode, 3 to 5 minutes, picking the NFL games for the weekend. But anyways, till next time. Bye-bye.